Welcome. Thank you for joining today's webinar about the San Francisco Foundation's 2020 Equity Grants Open Cycle. I'm Tessa Callejo, Senior Program Officer of the Foundation's Power Pathway, and I'll be moderating today's webinar. Today, we're going to discuss the following: the application timeline and process for our 2020 equity grants, and the specific strategies. I want to ask you, though, to make the most of your time, which means that if you could go onto our website and go to sff.org, Open Cycle 2020, sff.org/Open Cycle 2020, then you'll be able to open up the guidelines and follow along as we make the presentation. And you'll also have a chance to submit questions through the webinar chat window during the course of the presentation. And if you have questions that we aren't able to take because of the time constraints, you can reach out to my colleague, Maria Healy, at programs@sff.org. I would also want to acknowledge that this is a new way of doing a webinar for us. We've often done our PowerPoint and had the talking heads behind the scenes. What we wanted to do was introduce you to some of our senior program officers and our program director and our chief impact officer. And so we would love to have your candid feedback about how this goes and if it really helps you as a result of participating in the webinar. And you can get the webinar documents, including a sample application, afterwards, again, at the website at sff.org/Open Cycle 2020 to help you in preparing your application. So I'm here today with Judith Bell, Chief Impact Officer, Jidan Terry Kuhn, Senior Program Officer in our People Pathway, and Landon Williams, our Senior Director in our Place Pathway. We're going to explain what people, place, and power mean in a moment. At this point, I just want to be very clear that we heard from feedback from nonprofits that they really wanted to hear more from our different program staff. So we're hoping that this will be an opportunity for you to hear from us directly and get some of your questions answered. And we'll send out a short survey and see what you think. And be really candid. If this works well, we'd love to know that. If there are issues, we'll address those. So at this point, I want to hand it over to Judith, who will give an overview of the foundation and our equity grant making. Judith?
Great. Thanks, Tessa, and good afternoon, everyone, and thanks so much for joining us here today. The San Francisco Foundation is a community foundation. We've served the Bay Area since 1948 through grant making, partnering with donors and grantees and community leaders, engaging in community leadership and in advocacy. We have a long history of working with our many partners to advance social justice in the region. 3 years ago, we made a razor-sharp commitment to specifically advance racial justice and economic inclusion in the Bay Area. What we imagine is a Bay Area where everyone thrives, a region where we can walk down our streets and know that we belong, feel that we belong. We can earn a good salary, live in a safe and affordable home, and have a chance to shape the decisions that affect our communities. We're looking to help create a region where our prospects for success have no relationship to our zip code or the color of our skin. That brings us back to people, place, and power, which we think are the pathways to greater equity and economic inclusion, and are also the way we structure our equity grant-making program. Our People Pathway and our People Work envisions a Bay Area where everyone is financially stable. We believe that all Bay Area residents should be able to make a good living and build long-term financial well-being for their families and for their communities. By undoing discriminatory laws and practices, strengthening the voices of workers, and building community wealth, we and our partners are creating a Bay Area where families are thriving rather than merely surviving. Our Place work envisions a Bay Area where everyone has a safe and affordable home and lives in a vibrant community where arts and culture can flourish and where they feel like they belong. Housing is central to our work to advance equity, and our approach focuses on protecting tenants from evictions, preventing homelessness, preserving affordable places to live, and producing new housing for people across the region. Our Power work envisions a Bay Area where everyone has a strong political voice, To reach this goal, we are working with partners to organize people of color, people with low incomes, immigrants, and youth. By investing in this arena, we are mobilizing communities for social change. My colleague Tessa is here now to talk about the specific strategies that we are supporting in our 2020 Open Equity Grants cycle. Thank you, Tessa.
Thanks, Judith. To support our equity strategy and to respond to some of the feedback we've heard from grantees, we've made some changes over the last 3 years. Some of these changes include making more core support grants, making larger multi-year grants, focusing more on systemic change and policy change with less emphasis on direct services, and working closely with a focus group of nonprofits to improve our application process. But before diving into specific strategies that we'll support through the open cycle in 2020, I want to do a quick snapshot of the process itself. So at this point, if you haven't already, please go to sff.org/opencycle2020 and open up the guidelines that you'll find there so you can follow along, and feel free to send us some questions. You can do that anytime during the presentation as you hear us speaking. So first of all, when you review the guidelines, what you're going to see is the basic eligibility. 501c3 nonprofit organizations and fiscally sponsored projects that are located in and serve the 5 counties that we focus on will be considered. Those counties are Alameda, Contra Costa, Marin, San Francisco, and or San Mateo County. If you have other eligibility questions, please feel free to reach out to us and we'll try to assist you as best we can. I also want to focus in and share with you 3 key dates, and I'm going to repeat this a couple of times. So the 3 key dates are January 13th, January 27th, and February 3rd. January 13th, 2020 is when our application process opens online at our grantee portal on the San Francisco Foundation's website. The next date is January 27th, and this is important for new organizations that have not previously applied to the San Francisco Foundation and therefore don't have an account with us. And so we are asking that you go onto the grantee portal and set up an account for your organization if you don't already have one, no later than January 27th. And then a very important date is February 3rd. This is the deadline for applications to be submitted online by 5 o'clock that day. And we encourage you to submit earlier than that. As soon as the application is up and you've done the work and you've filled out your application, go ahead and feel free to submit earlier. The grant decisions will be made by our teams by May, and then the grants will be awarded in early June. And grant periods for grants that are awarded will start on June 1st. And at this point, I also want to note that our total pool for this open cycle across all of the strategies that you're going to hear about is $4 million. And we expect that we'll be able to make about 55 grants through the Equity Grants Open Cycle. The minimum grant amount that we will award is $50,000 or 20% of the annual organizational budget if the applicant is an organization with $250,000 or less as their organizational budget. The maximum grant amount we will award is $100,000 for 1 year or $150,000 over 2 years. So that's the range of the grant size. It's also important to know that we are planning to award grants for a minimum of 1 year and a maximum of 2 years. So you're probably wondering, well, what else does this staff team consider when making the decisions? And what I'd like to do is just call out a few of the considerations. One of the organizational considerations that we have is, has your organization demonstrated a commitment to racial and economic equity and inclusion? Is the leadership, board, and staff representatives of your community organization, do you have representation in your leadership from the community that you serve? Is the organization or project led by a person of color is another consideration. And does the applicant organization focus on systemic and policy change? And do you have a measurable impact that you can share with us? So those are some of the key considerations that our staff will look at. At this point, what I'd like to do, though, is move on. And but before moving on, I'd like to tell you that our next two speakers are going to be Jidon Terry Kuhn and Landon Williams. And so I'm going to hand it over to Jidon to talk about the people strategies.
Thank you, Tessa. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Jidon Terry Kuhn. I'm the Senior Program Officer in the People Pathway. And I'm going to give you an overview of what we're looking to support in this Equity Grants Open Cycle related to improving the economic well-being for low-income and people of color in the San Francisco Bay Area. And firstly, I'm honored to speak on behalf of my team. There were many staff that had countless conversations with leaders in the field related to this work. I just wanted to quickly shout them out with you all today. They are Hewan Asfa, Elena Chavez Quesada, David Kim, Taylor Kraft, and Melanie Jimenez. We also worked closely with our partners in the PLACE and POWER teams on these strategies. And as I review them with you, I want you to know we don't think we developed these strategies. We developed these to reflect what we heard from leaders in the field about this work. Also, in the way of context, Judith gave you a little snapshot of what our strategy for economic well-being is in the region. We recently landed this a couple months ago, and we'll be rolling that out in more detail in the coming months. And I'm really excited to share the two specific parts of that strategy that is featured in this Equity Grants Open Cycle. And those two parts are building community wealth and creating positive school climate. So I'll dive into building community wealth first. This strategy is at its core about reimagining who owns the assets of business and land in our communities, as well as how those things are owned. So we believe that when business and land is collectively owned by current residents, particularly residents of color, that is the best way to ensure ensure self-determination as well as prevent displacement. We anticipate that we'll be awarding about 13 one-year learning grants to support existing community wealth work in Alameda County and Contra Costa counties. And we're in particular looking to support groups that not only have their own community wealth projects, but that they have demonstrated linkages and partnerships with other players in the community wealth field. I'm going to pause right here to start to talk a little bit about what we mean and why we're doing a one-year learning grant. So we believe that our team has a lot to learn about the field of community wealth, and what we're hoping to do is have a first set of grantees that emerge out of this open equity grant cycle, and we will basically engage with them to learn with them over the course of a year about what does this work really look like on the ground, what are the shape and the flavor of the connections that the players have with each other in community, where do they think this work is going, and what do they think is needed to get them there. So at the end of that first year of learning, we anticipate that that learning will inform a multi-year strategy for community wealth in the Bay Area. So now I'll talk about the two kinds of work that we hope to be funding through this Equity Grants Open Cycle. The first kind is business cooperatives or worker-owned cooperatives. So our foundation does not typically fund directly to for-profit ventures. So we're looking to grant to organizations or cooperatives that are 501c3s or are fiscally sponsored, or maybe they have a nonprofit arm that's alongside their for-profit venture that can actually receive funding. We are also open to applications from limited liability corporations or LLCs, since that's the form of business that's available to our undocumented community members. The second bucket of work that we hope to be funding through community wealth is collective land ownership for the purposes of affordable housing and or cultural preservation. So we will be prioritizing community land trusts, limited equity housing cooperatives, as well as policy advocacy and organizing to promote resident ownership. We're also open to applicants that are providing training, leadership development, and other kinds of technical assistance to community wealth initiatives, as well as groups that are conducting organizing and policy advocacy to support cooperatively owned land and business. So that's what I have on building community wealth. Next, I'm going to talk to you about creating positive school climate. So our team took this on because we know that educational attainment is really closely linked to life outcomes as well as future income. And we also know that too often students of color, particularly Black and brown students, are made to feel unwelcome on campus. They face stereotyping and low expectations simply based on race, ethnicity, immigration status, gender, LGBTQ identities. The list goes on. And to combat this, we seek to support organizations that are conducting youth-led or multi-generational organizing to stop the criminalization of students of color on campus and to promote positive school climate and a culture of belonging rather than punitive discipline and or police. We believe that students and their families are the ones that are best positioned to speak on behalf of and advocate for their own and their children's social and academic well-being in schools. This strategy focuses on young people ages 11 to 24. So that goes from middle school to high school to community colleges. And we're focusing on Oakland Unified School District, San Francisco Unified School District, and school districts in Contra Costa County. We're anticipating awarding around 7 grants to organizations conducting this work. In addition, we're looking for organizations that are using at least 2 out of 3 approaches that I'm about to review with you. And to those of you that are practitioners in this field, you'll recognize that these 3 approaches are not really standalone approaches. They're actually pretty integrated in practice. The first approach is cultural and political education. So this looks like ethnic studies or cultural activities that build the power and dignity of young people through deeply understanding where they come from and their cultures and their many intersectional identities. It also builds their political analysis so they understand the history and the systems that have shaped the realities that they have to navigate on a day-to-day basis. The second approach is healing-centered or transformational organizing. And this is based on the premise that the only way, in order to sustain systems change, we have to support young people to heal from the trauma that they've experienced or inherited and to build their resilience. So this can look like, but is not limited to, support circles, peer counseling, mediation, restorative justice, and transformative justice. The last approach is probably the most obvious one. It's positive school climate policy change. And the thing that I want to lift up about this approach is that we know that students themselves are not the only important stakeholder to advocate, envision solutions, and implement policy change relating to positive school climate. There are families, there are teachers, there are administrators, legal intermediaries, community-based service providers, and the list goes on. So we're looking to support organizations that are engaging with at least one other stakeholder group outside of youth themselves. So that brings me to the end of the Positive School Climate and Building Community Wealth section. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to addressing your questions in the discussion session. And I'm going to pass it to my friend and my colleague, Landon Williams.
Thanks, Jadon. Hi, I'm Landon Williams. I'm the Senior Program Director here at the San Francisco Foundation for the PLACE team. And as Judith identified earlier, the PLACE team is a team that's focused on sharing, on maintaining diversity in our communities. It has a goal of ensuring that low income and in particular people of color are able to remain and have safe and affordable houses and places to live in our community, and also where arts and culture are appreciated and thrive. As we are aware, housing is like the fundamental basis for wealth and for community health. That is, with safe and secure housing, families thrive. They feel that they're in communities where they're welcome, their children thrive, and they can go about building the other kinds of things that help to make the community whole, their parks and schools and the like. It's also associated with just basic mental health and medical health. We will be awarding about 25 grants for work in one or more of the approaches that I'm going to describe below. The first approach is what we call our triad or our three Ps, and they're focused on housing. The three Ps are protection of tenants and tenant rights, it's preservation of existing affordable housing, and it's the production of new housing. And there's a rationale for how we apply and how we work on these three Ps. Protection is one of the easiest of the three Ps to accomplish, or it's one of the quickest ones that we can accomplish. We can do that through tenant rights, and we work with organizations that support or advance state and local and regional policies and practices that protect communities who are being displaced. We can work on anti-eviction work and anti-rent gouging work. It's something that can be done right now today. We're aware that in our region there are about 350,000 or more families that are facing eviction from this or displacement from our region. Many of those are ones who are renters, and our tenant protection policies are focused on renters. The second strategy is on preserving affordable housing. It takes a little longer to assemble the resources necessary to identify and then to secure affordable housing, to preserve affordable housing. So here we seek to support organizations that practice innovative strategies to ensure that, again, these communities of color and particularly low-income people are able to stay in affordable homes. Examples of that work include technical assistance that allows organizations to locate, secure, and then to place tenants or folks in affordable housing. It also can look at not only multifamily housing, but we can look at, are there organizations that are working to help maintain affordable housing that is single family. Examples include technical assistance. It includes innovative housing sharing models. It also includes things like what Jadon mentioned earlier, my colleague, when she talked about land trusts and other kinds of acquisition models that have limited equity with them that allows folks to also build community wealth. The third P is production of affordable housing. And although it's important, we put it on it takes longer. I don't know how else to say it. It just takes longer to build new housing than it takes to implement one of the other strategies. But we're aware that we have to have production of affordable housing. Why? Well, let's say that today we were able to protect every tenant who low income and person of color in the property the housing that they're currently in. So protection is working fine. Let's say that we're also able to preserve that affordable housing that currently exists so that there's no displacement there. Well, fundamentally, what we also need to realize is that in our region, we have underproduced housing for decades. So even if we're able to protect every tenant who's now in a housing, preserve every existing affordable housing, we still have a housing gap. And so we need to support production, but also to be aware that production takes time and it takes money and it takes a lot of other things, acquisition of land. But we still support organizations that are engaged in the development of housing through things like ones who are working to increase housing finance tools, housing bonds, real estate transfer taxes, other kinds of funding mechanisms that allow us to accumulate the capital that's needed to produce housing. So examples of that work includes organizations that are working to organize tenants, community members, and stakeholders who would directly advocate for special policies that are needed for us to secure the kinds of funding that lead to systematic change in public and institutional affordable housing policies, finance, and to support housing availability for persons at all income levels. So that's our three Ps. But there's a fourth area that we fund, and it's called art and culture. But it's not arts and culture in what is understood, say, in some traditional areas of arts or culture for arts and culture's sake. Instead, we support organizations that use arts and culture and the various genres. It can be theater art, it can be musical, it can be visual art, it can be performing art that are developed in a way to change the narrative that currently exists around housing. Part of the narrative as it exists now is that if you build housing, they will come. We need to change that narrative to say that housing is important to maintain the culture and the vibrancy of our neighborhoods, and that we need to be aware that housing affects whether or not children are able to grow up in a community where they feel accepted and wanted and needed. Housing also is one that affects what happens to our seniors when they grow old. Are they able to live around other seniors? Are they able to live in a community where people understand and recognize their needs and actually go out of their way to make sure that Landon, who's the senior, is taken care of? Is he safe in his home? But to do that, what we're saying is that we can do it through storytelling, or we can do it through theatrical performances, and we can do it through musical performances and dance. And so we wholly accept and embrace arts and culture as vehicles for narrative change. So that's what we do in place. We have a vibrant team. I have a lot of millennials on my team, so you all know what that means. But it's a fun group as well. Yeah. So having said that, what I want to do now is turn it over to my colleague who's facilitating the meeting today, who will talk about place, and that's not place, but about power, and that's Tessa.
Yeah. Thank you, Landon, and thank you, Jidan. I think that you brought a lot of texture and sort of richness to what's in these strategies. For those of you who are familiar with the foundation, you know that there's three pathways and that there's a power pathway as well as the people in place. So you might be wondering, where are the power strategies? What you'll see, I hope, is that if you look very closely, you'll see that a lot of what power has been funding, which is grassroots leadership development, community organizing, movement building, voter engagement, civic engagement, it's embedded in the other two strategy sets. So if you have any questions about that, you feel free to reach out to me, to others on our team. And really, there will be a chance when you do your application, when you choose a strategy, that there will be a supplemental strategy. So you can indicate any of the other power-related strategies as supplemental. So what we want you to do is tell us your story when you come in. And obviously, all of this works together. Without the organizing and the advocacy, we're not going to get to building community wealth and creating positive school climate and the production, preservation, and protection of housing and arts and culture as a form of narrative change when it comes to housing, shifting the housing conversation. So at this point, that's it on all of our presentations. And what we're going to do is we're going to open it up for questions. We have about a half an hour. So I want to, again, ask people to use the chat window on the webinar and send us the questions. And what I'm going to do is just, ask my colleagues to jump in here with answers. I'm going to start actually with Jidan. Jidan, the first question comes for you.
Great.
And,
I'm ready.
Are you ready?
Yes.
Good. All right. So the first question is, will you be funding work to help everyone have access to quality education through college access and success programs?
I understand where that question comes from. It's really important that young people have a sense of what's possible for them and where they're going in order to really focus on their studies and, you know, their academic life right now while they're in K through 12. That is not the focus of this set of guidelines. This is really around youth-led, multi-generational organizing, addressing specifically what some folks might call the school-to-prison pipeline, or as we word it, positive school climate policy change.
Thank you, Jadon.
Thank you.
The next question is for Judith. We have another question, and it's the question is if our equity grants open cycle will fund direct services. Judith?
We will fund direct services, but we have quite a focus on policy and systems change. And so we'll look for that even in the context of direct services, and ask folks to lift that up in the context of what they're asking for.
Okay, great. So I'm going to invite you to send more questions, folks. Here's one more question. It's the next question is for Landon. So Landon, you ready for this?
Yeah.
Okay, this is going to be a big one. Drum roll, here it comes. We're having a little technology thing going on here, no worries. In the housing work, Redwood City is listed. I'm not sure if I understand this question. Okay, I'm gonna roll on, and I see it is, okay, Redwood City is listed, as is East Palo Alto, but not North Fair Oaks. So can you talk about the geographic focus of your grant making?
Okay. So Redwood City is identified, but it's not the entire city of Redwood City. There are areas in almost all neighborhoods that have, as we're aware, affordable housing problems with tenants being displaced and with folks having difficulty finding housing. What you'll see on our list, though, is a representative sample of communities and neighborhoods based on some of the data that we uncovered or that we used when we were building our equity strategy. It's not an all-inclusive list. And so there are parts of East Palo Alto that definitely are under extreme pressure. I mean, they were noted, I think, in particular because of, as we all know, Facebook is there and what kind of pressures the competition for housing has led to in a community like East Palo Alto. So we tried to identify some of the most, I'd say some of the most extreme examples, but we didn't get to everyone.
Okay, great.
Tessa, is it okay if I add a little bit more to the question that I fielded right before Landon?
Please.
Thank you, College and Career Access questioner. I wanted to add a little bit more context because I know my answer was like that's not addressed. And to the strategy that I referenced in my presentation section, we really looked at what was our unique value add as the San Francisco Foundation. And a part of what we took into account was that there are many more donors and funders that would be friendly to contributing to college and career access. And the universe of donors and foundations that are willing to fund grassroots youth-led organizing is much smaller. And so we felt like that was probably the best unique offering that we could hold in that space. Great.
The next question is about our overall open cycle. And the question is, do you have to be a 501c3 or can you be fiscally sponsored? I mentioned this early, but I probably went quickly over it. You can definitely be fiscally sponsored, and you could be a 501c3. I want to just raise up the location question because I think that this is one that comes up a lot. But you could be an organization that's not based in the Bay Area, but you have to have work in the 5 counties, at least one of the 5 counties where we're working. So I think that's important to notice. There's another question about collaboratives that has come up. And can an organization lead a collaborative? And then does that mean they can't apply for their own work? So I'm going to actually ask Judith if she would address that question.
So we do fund collaboratives for sure. We ask a lead organization to be the lead for the collaborative and to apply. And then we will fund that organization, understanding that they're representing a broader group of organizations. And then that organization can also apply for their own work if they so choose, and we will consider that grant as well.
Great. So we have another question for Jidan. The question is, would small businesses that are launched and run by formerly incarcerated people but are not co-ops be considered for funding in the Building Community Wealth Strategy?
That's a great question. The core of that strategy is around collective ownership. So I anticipate us sticking to that. And since this is the first time we've really stepped into that field, this is also an opportunity for us to learn what's out there. So I know that's not a straight answer, but I would anticipate not likely, because the core of the strategy is around collective ownership. And, as we learn more about what's out there, there are specific populations that we have special interest in, and formerly incarcerated, systems impacted people are definitely one of those. And for Native communities, Southeast Asian communities, there's a number of communities that are important, and we understand that the ecosystem of nonprofits in those communities a lot of times is not as developed and varied as for other populations. So in some instances, we are flexible, more flexible relating to those populations.
Great. This is a good time to remind viewers that a recording of this webinar will be available on our website at sff.org/opencycle2020. Did I get that right? Yes, sff.org/opencycle2020. Okay, moving right along. We have a question for Landon. Will you consider, Landon and your team, will you consider proposals that cross over all 4 areas?
Yes. So we're aware that there's some organizations who only focus on the protection issues, but then there's some that do protection and preservation, and we're aware that there are organizations, not a lot, that we found who are active in all 3 Ps, and yes, we would consider it.
Okay.
And if I could expand a little bit on what I said before about a neighborhood, if you believe that your neighborhood should be included in the list of neighborhoods or in the work that we outline, apply. It is a competition, but we do invite you to apply, because we're not aware of every neighborhood. We would do a site visit, and we'd come out and talk to you, take a look at the neighborhood and make a decision.
Great. So this is a question that I think Judith can answer. Will core support grants still be funded?
Absolutely. We will fund core support grants, and we will also support project grants, but both will be available for those who are applying for support.
Great. Here's another question. Are organizations with current or active grants with the San Francisco Foundation eligible to apply? And the answer is yes. Current grantees can apply for a concurrent grant in the 2020 Equity Grants Open Cycle. Okay, let's see. The next question. This question asks, can organizations outside of the Bay Area apply if they work in a project? And the answer is yes, that if the organization is based outside of the Bay Area, they can, if there is a project that they're, say, partnering with in the Bay Area, in the 5 counties I listed, any one of them or all or more of them, then yes, they can apply. The next question, Judith, I'm going to bounce it back to you on this one. Are 501c4 organizations eligible to apply?
In this open cycle, 501c4s are not eligible to apply. The foundation does support 501c4s, but in the open cycle, this time we will not be supporting 501c4 organizations.
Great. Okay, and so there's one question here that I want to pull up, which is, if an organization doesn't have a previous funding relationship with the foundation, will their application be considered only after all current and past grantees are considered? And the answer, I want to answer this one, is no. Okay, I hope everybody's heard that. No. Priority will not be given to current or past grantees. Organizations new to the foundation are highly encouraged to submit an application. Okay.
Tessa, can I just jump in for
Yes,
a second?
please.
To be clear that while we're not supporting 501c4 organizations, these grants will include and will support advocacy. So we all know there are many ways for folks to move policy change or be engaged in power building. And so we're not going to use the avenue of supporting a 501c4, but we do encourage organizations to include those kinds of activities in their proposals when they submit them to us.
Great. The next question is for Jidan. Jidan, can charter schools apply for positive school climate policy change work?
That's a really great question. The core of the intent of this, the positive school climate part of the guidelines, is to support K through 12 public education and with a lean towards the traditional schools. And we also understand that there are certain charter schools that support special populations, and those are the kinds of charters that would be considered.
Okay, great. This next question's for Landon. Can you give us some very specific examples, Landon, of current programs in your strategies?
Current programs, sure I can. We are supporting organizations that have helped to develop and also to get enacted just cause eviction ordinances. We've supported organizations that have helped to develop anti-rent gouging and other measures that are directed towards some egregious landlords. On the other side of that, we know that just having an ordinance or a rule by itself is not sufficient. So we've funded organizations that provide direct legal services to tenants who are being challenged around their housing status. We've funded organizations that have purchased housing apartment buildings and then made them affordable in terms of long-term and removed them from the speculative or the development market. We funded organizations that have worked on housing bonds. We've funded organizations that have worked on real estate transfer measures. We funded arts and culture organizations who are putting on performances that are directed toward, for instance, putting on a performance that, theatrical performance that demonstrates the challenges that mixed status families have and why it's important that they become engaged not only in the census work, but also become engaged in those members who can register and go out and vote on the issues that are important to them. Those are a few we have right now, currently, we have about 40 grants that we're working, grantees, and I don't want to describe all of them, but that's just an example of the kind of work.
Thank you. Judith, here's a question I'd like you to answer. Do you fund grants to support the planning of a project?
Yes, we would support a grant that's towards planning a project, provided the project was aiming towards the kinds of results that my colleagues have described. So we would support that, yes.
Okay. So there's another question now, and please keep sending us the questions. That would be awesome. Can we submit applications to more than one pathway? So I'll answer this, and if anybody else wants to jump in, feel free. I mean, when you go on and you're doing the application, you're going to be asked to choose strategies. And so you're not actually submitting applications to separate pathways. It's that you'll have a chance to choose the strategy or several strategies, and then there's some supplemental strategy choices. Anyone else want to jump in on that? Jidan?
Yeah, so there you'll actually get a chance to select 3 different strategies. So for instance, you could say my primary strategy is around tenant protection, and then my secondary strategy is around community wealth. And then there'll be a third supplemental strategy that would be one of the power ones, and it could be grassroots organizing. So that would be a proposal that touches all 3 people, power, and place pathways. What that means is there's more opportunity for different pots of funding to be accessed. Mm-hmm. And the key thing is for you to choose the strategies that you feel like most describe your work. So, sometimes if your work is really just aligned with place and that's the strongest alignment, don't try to make it right touch all of us, because when we read it, we may not see it in the proposal. Sometimes a really strong fit with one pathway is the way to go. So just choose the selections that most closely describe your work.
And I just want to add that we had a whole team that designed the open cycle this time. And so right after this webinar, you can go on to our website and you'll be able to get a sample application. You'll get a guide that you can walk through and look at how you can answer those questions. So we're giving you a lot to work with. So we really encourage you to tap in and look at those documents afterwards. At this point, there's another question for Jidon. And then we will move on. This one is going to be regarding building community wealth. Are you supporting capital campaigns, community land acquisition, or organizing work to build capacity for building ownership and management?
Yes.
Oh, that was simple. And anything more you want to add? No. Okay, good. All right. Well, we're just going to get as many questions in here as we can. So this question's for Judith. These guidelines are very narrow. How else does the foundation try to address equity in the Bay Area?
Oh, that's a great question.
I want to jump in on the capital campaign part.
You can go ahead and why don't you say what you were going to say now?
Sorry. Let me double check with Tessa. Actually, we don't fund capital campaigns. So, sorry, for the last questioner around community wealth, the last 2 things listed, yes. The first thing, capital campaigns, no.
So organizing around capital campaigns, yes, but we do not support a capital campaign itself.
And community land acquisition, we do support, correct? That's the question that they brought. It would just be if you can answer it.
The technical assistance for that, yes.
Okay.
The actual amassing of funding to do that, no.
Okay. That's right. Thank you. So back to you, Judith, with the question about how else does the foundation address equity in the Bay Area?
Yeah. So we have a number of different grant programs. For instance, we do have a rapid response fund that operates. It'll be back open in January, and that provides small, fast grants for those who are addressing immediate issues in our communities. And then we have other types of grant-making programs through our FAITH program and through other initiatives. And then we do have invitational-only grant programs as well, which build from our open grant cycle, from a rapid response, and develops our strategies in greater depth across the region.
Can I add that we have I can remember the name, a PRI program. It's now
Bay Area Community Impact Fund.
Thank you.
Good teamwork. All right.
Which also provides capital loans to organizations that fit within our equity framework.
Yes, and if you're interested in the PRI program, the Bay Area Community Impact, use that programs at sff.org, and we will route that question to that team so that you can get into that process, which is different than the grant-making process.
Mm-hmm. Great. Okay, this next one is a question for you, Landon. Would the foundation support proposals that target the missing middle, people who fall in the 80 to 120% AMI range?
So the foundation does have parts of the there's for instance, a regional partnership fund that targets the missing middle. It targets low income, and it has very low income targets as well. For the PLACE team, We target mainly low income, very low income, but the foundation has other vehicles that do the missing middle. They're not available though here in the open cycle.
Okay.
But you could go to which would be URL found or sff.org/ Open Cycle 2020.
For more information.
Remember, this is experimental.
Yeah, we are experimenting. Just remember that. So, Jidan, I'm going to ask you to answer this next one, and maybe I'll jump in after. Would you consider organizations that do power building and policy advocacy regarding positive school climate or gentrification at the school district and city levels?
Yeah, that's a little bit of a general description, and if it's at the district level, positive school climate policy advocacy, and it's youth-led or multi-generational, yes.
Okay, now there's another question.
Add in? Oh.
No, I think that's fine. I just wanted to tell you though that for folks who are listening in, the Power Pathways staff will be involved in the open cycle. Our work is in support of these strategies that have been described. But for those of you who are already in relationship with us, feel free to reach out to us, both through sending questions to the link we gave, programs@sff.org, that email, but also just to us. We're here. We want to be available to you. So this next question is, will you post the Q&As, the questions and answers on your website? Yes, we will do that. And again, you'll have to go to sff.org/OpenCycle2020. I feel a little bit like a robot here on this, but I really decided because this is new and you can't see it on a PowerPoint, we're drumming that in. So the next question is, in your guidelines, you mentioned that organizations that have not received open cycle equity grants since 2016 will be considered particularly or specifically. Does that mean that 2018 open cycle grantees are not eligible to apply for a 2020 grant? That almost sounds like a trick question. But I think, the thing I would say is that if you applied, let me go back to what we said earlier, that if you have a concurrent grant or if you had been funded recently, you can still apply. We were not trying to send the message that you should not apply. We're just trying to make sure that there's space for new organizations that are coming in. And so in terms of any more depth on that question, I want to refer you to the frequently asked questions document that you can access on our website in terms of that specific reference. I know it might be a little bit confusing, and if you're still confused, reach out to one of us and we'll talk it through with you. Next question is for Landon. Would you consider funding media projects under your Changing the Housing Narrative Through Arts and Culture strategy?
Short answer is yes. There are a couple that I could cite. I don't want to call out the grantee, but they're ethnic media, radio stations. We fund them. We've also funded a neighborhood-based newsletter or newspaper. We didn't fund them for any of the political work that they did around advocating for or against candidates for office, but we did fund them in terms of the education work that they do around housing and displacement issues in their neighborhood.
Okay. Let's see. We're getting down to the end of our time, but so like I said, if we can't get your question, we'll follow up afterwards. So this question is for Jidan. If we work closely with the Oakland Unified School District to offer programs with Title I schools, can our nonprofit be eligible for a positive school climate grant?
Great question. It depends on whether the core of your work is youth-led or multi-generational organizing, or whether it's more like, you're contracted by the district or by the sites to deliver some kind of direct service. If it's the former, rooted in youth-led and multi-generational organizing, yes. If it's the latter, more kind of like adult-led, technical assistance, training, or direct service provision, no.
Okay. All right. This question is for Judith. We're a 501c3 with a 501c4 affiliate. You don't fund C4s in the open cycle, but you do want to fund policy work. How do you advise organizations such as ours to navigate this?
Oh, well, there are many ways to be supported. We do support lobbying work. We do provide general support grants that give organizations the full flexibility to do what they are legally permitted to do. So in both of those examples, some of the kind of activities you would do with your C4, you can also do with your C3. And so we encourage you to apply knowing the limitations under C3, but also knowing the opportunities for engaging in advocacy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. There's another question I have here, which is, can multiple groups with the same fiscal sponsor apply multiple times? I guess the short answer is yes. Multiple projects can come under the same fiscal sponsor. So that's not an issue. And another question I have is, can organizations with budgets under $1 million apply for equity grants open cycle funding, or should they apply through a separate pot of funding? There are no budget thresholds for applications to the equity grants open cycle is the answer. Okay, the next question is for Landon. We're getting close to the end here, but we'll try and see how many more we can get into. What does San Francisco Foundation think about supporting projects for artist housing using new models of social impact investment?
Wow, that's a good question. It's one I haven't given a lot of thought to. We have thought about the issue of our arts and cultural organizations being displaced from the region. In fact, the San Francisco Foundation was one of the lead organizations that developed in San Francisco the anti-displacement, nonprofit anti-displacement strategy that led to the city and county putting considerable funding into arts, into a fund to stabilize arts organizations in San Francisco. We're doing some of the similar work with some of our foundation partners in 6 counties, but we haven't yet really come face to face, I think, with that particular issue about artist co-ops, or artist housing co-ops. And so, one of my colleagues was.
Well, I would just say that depending on how well developed the proposal is, if you're looking for investors, and it might qualify for program-related investment, it just depends on the nature of the project and whether you're more at the beginning stages or whether you've already begun to identify some of the revenue sources to be able to build such a project. Mm-hmm. So I'd encourage you to, if you are at that stage, to again reach out to programs at sff.org, mm-hmm. and we can connect you with the folks who are a part of that Bay Area Community Impact Fund.
So we have 2 more questions, and I think that's about as much time as we have. For Judith, will you consider proposals from national organizations not based in the San Francisco Bay Area, and do they need to have a local partner?
They need to be doing work in the region, and then they are eligible. It's always great to have a local partner. The most important thing is to be doing work in at least one of the 5 counties, San Francisco, San Mateo, Alameda, Contra Costa, or Marin.
Great. The last question is for Jidan. In the Building Community Wealth category, are you funding organizations that are still developing a program or those that already have a program in place?
We're looking to support existing work, so that would mean people who are already conducting the project.
Okay, great. I think that's it. I think we're at the wrapping up point here. Again, I want to thank my colleagues. I want to thank all the people in the team that made this webinar possible and all the folks who worked on the open cycle. And we really, this doesn't replace direct contact. Reach out to us with questions. We're really excited about this open cycle. And if you have specific questions that could be helpful to other people, please send them into programs@sff.org, and then we'll be able to update our frequently asked questions. And so again, there's going to be a sample application. We're going to send out a recording of this call, the guidelines and the FAQs, and we will regularly send out over social media and email reminders about the deadlines. But you can always find information at sff.org, Open Cycle 2020. We're super thrilled to partner with aligned organizations, and there are so many in the Bay Area, to make it a place where not only people can survive, but people can thrive. And we thank you for all the work you do. Thank you.